Burma, or Myanmar as we now have to call it, and some of us here are less than comfortable, I know, with that designation. But this has been one of the countries that have really been at the forefront of my concern for many years, certainly as Foreign Minister until '96, and then for nearly a decade, during which I was based in Europe as head of the International Crisis Group after I left Australian politics. I had visited the country, albeit too briefly, during my student travelling days way back in the '60s, and was absolutely enchanted, as so many of you have been, with the people, the culture, the landscape. I was Foreign Minister when the old regime collapsed in 1988, and when students and monks and so many ordinary people went out in the streets calling for democracy. I saw, as you did, what happened next, and deeply felt the agony and frustration of the country's people when so much went wrong and stayed wrong for 20 or more years of repression and despair. I argued for years that ASEAN, which was the only external organisation of which the regime, stuck in its isolationist ways, seemed to take any notice at all, should not admit Myanmar to full membership unless it changed its ways. And I, as I guess again many of you did, almost wept with frustration when that particular pass was sold in 1997. I felt Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's agony when her husband, Michael Aris, whom I knew at Oxford, was dying in 1997. And the regime made clear, as you remember, that if she left the country to see him, she would never be allowed back. When the devastating cyclone Nargis struck in 2008, killing many thousands, threatening the lives of many thousands more, I shared the incredulity of the rest of the world about how long the generals dragged their feet before agreeing to international help. But almost from the beginning, for all these frustrations and setbacks and continuing violations of basic human rights and democratic principles, I felt that the door should be kept open and processes identified that would encourage the country's rulers to open their eyes to what was making their next-door neighbours move forward so fast while they stagnated. Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, China, India, Bangladesh. As an old anti-apartheid campaigner, I initially felt that I should wash my mouth out if I ever let the expression constructive engagement escape my lips in this or any other context. But as the years wore on, it became more and more obvious that an approach based solely on piling on the sanctions, compounding the regime's isolationist sense of intransigence, was going nowhere very fast. And that ways should be found of making more contact, not only with non-governmental organisations and citizens, but with the military government itself, making clear that progressive movement on key issues would be progressively rewarded. I remember floating, as Chris does, this kind of approach as far back as 1992, speaking as Foreign Minister at a seminar held at Griffith University. And then a couple of years later, as Foreign Minister, identifying some key benchmarks, including, of course, release of political prisoners and peaceful reconciliation with the ethnic minorities, which could be used to gauge performance and deliver then an appropriate international response. But progress was very slow. And when I was with the International Crisis Group through the decade of the noughties, I found that we were, as your panellist next, Morten Pedersen, who was our representative in country at the time, will well remember, I found us still considerably ahead of the curve, as we argued, much to the distaste of many of our friends in the United States in particular, that the hardline Western sanctions policy was simply counterproductive in achieving the necessary political change and should be recalibrated. Well, things have now changed at last under the leadership of Thein Sein and with his rapprochement with Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. Hopes for the future, economically, democracy and human rights terms, are now, of course, very much brighter than they have been for 2 decades. I don't think we should overgild the lily in this respect. I, for one, along with many others in the international community, remain acutely concerned at the continuing tensions that exist with non-Burman ethnic minorities in various parts of the country, and above all with the terrible situation of the Muslim Rohingya people in Rakhine State, who continue to be subject to killing and forced displacement, and who, of course, despite having lived in the country for generations, are still regarded by the military and by Dorsu as Bangladeshi immigrants. But these issues apart, the news has been good and long awaited. And your work here in the new Australia-Myanmar Institute today is perfectly poised to build on the hopes for the country's future we all share, and to help it meet the immense challenges which lie ahead as an intense reform program comes up against the constraints of a still exceedingly underdeveloped governance structure. The Institute's 6 pillars of proposed concentration, politics and governance, economy and business, law, health, education and heritage and the environment seem to me to be a very strong base from which to work, especially as you have set gender and diversity and reconciliation as strong underpinnings for each of those pillars. I'm very impressed to see so many prominent figures from various Australian universities coming to Melbourne for this event. This is the first time I can recall really such a truly collaborative purpose for an institute of this type, and I do hope that the different universities and government agencies watch your progress here at the Institute with care and provide the appropriate institutional support when that time is right. I'm also very pleased to see the way in which the concerns of business have been integrated into the conference. It's very important to ensure that the UN Global Compact's principles for social investment are part of investment planning, and that governments back the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises as they consider requests for support by companies wishing to enter the Myanmar market. Myanmar simply isn't equipped to handle the onrush of interest which the government's reform program has stimulated and of which we're seeing such evidence by your attendance here today. It's very good to know that the AMI plans to help meet these capacity needs and to do so in partnership with a parallel entity in Yangon. I very strongly support the importance of ensuring that the country's needs are identified in country and not by people sitting around conference tables thousands of kilometres away. But we also recognise that it's vital that the identification of need is done by people who are well trained for this responsibility and who are in touch with needs as expressed at the community level in country. Well, these are all big challenges and they're beyond the resources of any single Australian institution. It is going to require an ongoing collaborative effort, but with the Institute here as a kind of umbrella organisation to help coordinate and deliver that effort, it's a hugely welcome addition to the landscape. I wish AMI well and trust the collaboration that it plans that will be kick-started at this conference will bring us together in Australia on an ongoing basis in support of the real needs of the people of that wonderful country. Thank you.